always having a yard sale, but it was just our dignity, you know?
We chanted the mother song, we held our breath, inhale, exhale.
You're listening to Public Comments, an arts equity radio show on WXNA 101.5 FM, Nashville.
Hello, I'm Christine Hall.
And I'm Lydia Youssef.
We are here with a returning guest, Daniel Singh. He is the former director of Metro Arts, an artist, dancer, writer, parent, and community organizer working to change systemic forms of racism, extractive capitalism, and oppression. Thank you so much for joining us today, Daniel.
It's a pleasure to be here. Good to see you both.
You as well. We're really grateful to have Daniel back on the program. We were live on air on WXNA last Saturday, February 8th. However, with the call-in, there was some digital feedback throughout. So we're going to do a re-recording, which is great because we are looking forward to diving back into these issues with Daniel. This is Public Comments, a limited series where we're building an artist-centered narrative about the Title VI complaint process that got artists their money back here in Nashville while exposing discriminatory funding practices. This show will serve as an archive and a roadmap as we continue advocating for the equitable arts funding our city deserves. Daniel Singh, thank you again for joining us. Would you like to tell us some about your background and what brings you to this advocacy?
Yeah, so I stumbled into dance in college when I was a computer science major. I had to take a physical education requirement, and I took a dance class, and it kind of changed my life. And it also made me question why I didn't have access to arts till that last class I needed to finish college, right? So it ended up changing my degree and finishing dance, but it made me aware that arts hadn't been accessible to me in the way that I had wanted before that, so that was an eye-opening moment for me, both for discovering dance, but also for understanding that for all these years I didn't have access to it. And so kind of that moment has been what has influenced everything I do. I want to make the arts accessible to folks. I want it to be transformative in communities like it was for me. And so I hope we can keep doing that work to get there. I feel like arts builds communities, and when communities are bonded and strong, they can think critically, they can form resistance. And this is why we need the arts, right? Not always. The arts sometimes are co-opted as well by the ruling class. But if there's a healthy organization, a healthy organized community, then there's an option for us to think critically and resist whatever we might need to resist as well.
Yes to that. Yeah. that very clearly names it. Thank you, Daniel. Here at Public Comments, we like to start with offering our guests the chance to give a 2-minute public comment, as one might at a publicly noticed meeting. We, of course, then get to dive in and unpack and hear more, much more, which is what we need to do and what our aim here on this program is. Daniel, would you like to start us off with a 2-minute public comment?
Yes, I will attempt to do so. I wanted to really thank the artists and Arts Equity in Nashville, because I feel like you are doing the work, and I wanted to lift up the individual artists, the artists who filed the MHRC grievance, and Arts Equity for continuing the work that you're doing. And I'm learning from all of you. And so I think about systems and how systems always work the way they are designed, right? People often say, oh, this is an anomaly. This is a problem, we'll fix this one little thing, but the overall system is always working the way it was intended to work, right? So whether it's labor laws or whether it's arts funding for individual artists, system works the way it's supposed to work, right? So there's nothing that's an anomaly here. Everything is designed. And the arts have been on all sides of this, right? The arts have sometimes been in the resistance camp, anti-racist, anti-colonial, but sometimes they've been co-opted, right? Like all these Oscar, Grammy, and Met galas happening. Well, there's a genocide happening in Gaza, right? And so there's a way in which you give them bread and circus through the arts and distract, and then people don't focus on what's really needing to be focused. And I hope we can talk more about what's happening in Gaza and Palestine as a whole and talk about how colonization project works at the macro level and then what it does in a micro level here at in Nashville as well. And people might ask, well, why are you talking about colonization? What does it have to do with today? And I think about what's happening in Google, right? There's a South Asian CEO, and he squashed the anti-caste movement that some of the employees were trying to start, right? So there's an example of how someone who is part of the community who actually upholds the ruling class oppression, right? So not only did he do that, he also removed the language from the AI commitment that they would not use AI for warfare. So we don't need the ruling class when we have co-opted people within the community doing the work. And this was true in India for me. So that's kind of why I wanted to connect those pieces. And then I think about how the attacks will be psychological, economic, legal. It'll be at multiple fronts, right? We saw this again in Gaza as well as here. It's not just, oh, well, legal requires this, you can fix it, but there's like an assault, all front assault, like what's happening right now in Washington, D.C., right? They'll tie you up with so many things that you can't move forward. So this is an all-out assault. And so I talk about how this kind of came together from the arts monopolies in Nashville, even without saying a word, right? Like they never had to say anything. Then so that's another example of how power doesn't have to actually exert power. It just has to show that it has power, and things just work the way they want it to work. And we have the opposite example of Fisk Jubilee singers who haven't been funded despite being a Grammy Award winning flawless organization of the community for 150 years, right? So how that works in the local scene, right, between the arts monopolies and Fisk Jubilee singers. And then you think about how it works within the commission or the staff or the mayor's office, right? Like there's always people who are working on behalf of the ruling class so that they never have to do the dirty work, right? You can have a procurement study, you can have a disparity study, you can have a DEIA office, and all of that gives cover for the machine to keep working the way the system was designed to work, right? So I wanted to mention that piece as well. And I think the power of white supremacy or racial capitalism or colonialism or whatever you want to call it is to splinter groups, right? This was the big tactic in India, divide and conquer, right? There are only a few thousand soldiers, British soldiers in India, in a country of hundreds of thousands, but they were able to go in and little splinter groups everywhere, and they broke up this big collective. And not that they were always a collective, there were different kingdoms and rulers and all of those things, but they were collectively organized against the British. And so they splintered them by promising this to this person, that to that person, or whatever expectations the local rulers or local chieftains had. They were able to use that to splinter India and colonization. And that happened in the commission, right? You saw commissioners being picked off one by one. You saw the committees being picked off one by one. You saw staff being picked off one by one, so that the ruling class never has to really use all of its might. It just has to rearrange the table a little bit, and then suddenly we're not able to do it. And the questions I asked, when I first started was like, why was the Fisk Jubilee Singers not funded? And then the other question I had when Councilperson Joy Stiles, again, who was moved out of being the chair of the Arts Committee, right? So there's another way you see whenever there's resistance, that person gets moved out, right? So Councilperson Joy Stiles was doing this great work, advancing anti-racism and equity, and called that meeting, and people were talking about outreach, how all these arts monopolies were going out and doing outreach, as if we don't have our own culture, as if we don't have our own ways of holding our community, and that only the Western colonial ideals of art is what we need to be educated on, right? And so they were talking about how they're going to Title IX schools and doing so many outreach activities. And I was like, first of all, we have our own culture. Second, why is there a Title IX school in a city with $130 million surplus at that point, right? So those are the questions I had, and I want to work through those questions with all of you, and I want to also give credit to Justin Lang, who's been really helpful in clarifying our own definitions of whether we want to be in the reform lane of trying to fix capitalism, which after 400 years, maybe it's time to give up on, or do we want to be in some other radical space that's not about reforming this dying capitalist system, but something else. So that's the two lanes we have to choose, and I'd rather be on the radical side and imagine something new and hopefully get some reparations to the artists and move from there.
Yeah. Yes, that's beautiful. I love that. Artists performing the function of imagining, envisioning, and creating this new way forward, and being so audacious as to suggest that and to walk that path. Thank you.
A lot of good stuff out of this public comment. I want to start at the top where you're talking about systems design and the manufacturing of systems, because this is coming up a lot now. I feel like we're now at this point with Metro Arts where it's becoming very cyclical. And you seem to be like kind of a clog in that system in 2022 to kind of break the cycle. And what we're hearing a lot now, which is what we were hearing last year a lot, is like there isn't much of a choice. Like we must listen to legal and finance. There isn't much of a choice in terms of not listening to an audit, not listening to state law. There isn't much of a choice. We have to just, as commissioners, just do what has been done, the status quo, and we don't have a choice in this. And you guys are blaming us, but there isn't much of a choice. Did you feel that that was, what was the environment you were coming into in 2022? I feel like it was very different from the environment we are in now, where it's very much the cyclical nature of it versus 2022, there was kind of a break to say, we do have choices. We are going to actively change this, and we can, and we can bring the other departments along with us. So can you speak to that, or that kind of mid 2022 working through that with the community?
Yeah. I'll zoom back a little bit and talk about how the NEA was founded and then come back to 2022 because it's related. The NEA was founded in the 60s while there was this huge political uprising. National Endowment for the Arts, yes. And it was founded when there was this huge political activation by the Black Panther Party. There was a huge movement by the youth against the Vietnam Wars. Like the 60s were all of those movements, right? So all of those movements were happening and people were wanting radical change, right? Like the Black Panther had a very clear list of demands, 10 list of demands, and they wanted material things, like they wanted land, they wanted money, and they were providing these things, right? They were providing breakfast in the communities, healthcare in the communities, safety for the communities. And so the NEA was created as the Great Society by Lyndon Johnson to distract from that. And then again, it all absorbed the Western European ideals of what should be part of the Great Society: ballet, opera, symphony, museums, right? Like very much the legacy or monopoly organizations that as you would consider. And at that point, even though they were funding those big organizations, NEA was also funding individual artists. Fast forward to the 90s, and artists were doing resistance work, right, against HIV, women's rights, LGBTQ rights. And so there was a conservative backlash. They didn't want individual artists doing resistance work, so they stopped funding individual artists. And then you create this monster of nonprofit industrial complex that's the middle management, people like me in Nashville, instead of funding artists directly, because then you could censor and control what the resistance work was happening in the artists, right? You could prevent the artists from working with the communities, the splintering, right, that they were doing in colonial practices. Like they started splintering the artists. And so all of that kind of a background as I started in 2022, what excited me about the position was that there was an anti-racism committee, right? CARE, Committee on Anti-Racism and Equity. And it was so integral to the website and the language. And then I read some of the press stories that was circulating at that time, and I saw that there was issues. But then I saw that Mattia Powell was there as the vice chair, and she conducted the interview. on the Zoom meeting and also in person. And so I felt, and I asked her very direct questions, right? Like, how will you support me if I come into this position? How will you prevent this from happening again? What has happened there to the staff, supposedly, and all of these questions. And she was very supportive. She was very transparent. And as you see in her voting decisions, she has been pro anti-racist pathways. And she also said in the CARE and commission meeting, which we had, I got there in like July of 22, and about October of 22, we had a CARE and committee joint meeting. And there were only 3 commissioners out of the 15 who showed up, right? So it was just Mattia, Ellen Angelico, Marianne Bird who came there.
Wow.
And that was supposed to be the reset, right? Like there's been all this issues, let's reset and move forward. And only 3 people came. And at that point, Mattia said, does CARE and the commission want to move forward on the anti-racist path or just the DEIA stuff? They're 2 different things. DEIA is going to try to reform the system. Anti-racist is like moving outside the system, envisioning radical new or ancestral practices, right? Like ancestors have been doing this. It doesn't have to be recreated if there's something that we can just take from our ancestors. And everyone said, we want to do anti-racist work, right? So this was something that was a charge given to me by the people who came. And they said, all right, people in the room who showed up made the decision. We're going to move forward in this way, right? And then so after that meeting, we had the grants editing process, which again was never done in a communal way till then. Staff just made up the questions and edited them.
Oh wow. So you were the first director to do grants editing with the community.
With the community, yes.
Wow.
Yes. Till then,
Okay.
it was always a staff-driven initiative, and maybe commissioners had some input in it, but the grants committee might have had some input in it, but it was just a staff-driven initiative. So it was the first time it was a community-driven grants editing process. And so we put a call out, and 27 artists and arts organizations came and helped us edit the grant application, simplify the process. But I still want to say clearly that I'm still being very much in the reform lane, right? I haven't done anything radical. I'm not redistributing. I'm not working towards reparations. I'm just going through every single bureaucratic loophole I can close. The grants need to be edited. Do it with a public thing, because all meetings have to be noticed publicly. Notice everything publicly. Do it publicly. Record it. Put it on the web. Let everyone see it. Go to the grants committee. Go to CARE. Then go to the commission. Like, so I'm just like, I am working through the system very, very, very carefully. The simplification process and the new formulas were sent to the DEA office. And I said, would you be comfortable speaking on this, good or bad, at the commission meeting? And the DEA office refused, right? Like that was the first sign for me of maybe things are not as simple as it is, right? They said, you can say this was sent to us. And I said, can I say you approved it or no? You can say it was sent to us, but you cannot say it was approved or not approved. We're not willing to take a stand on it. So you see how processes you think are there for equity or anti-racism are not willing to really put themselves on the line in a public comment process, right? So that's kind of where we were in December. And when we got the Thrive vote, the formula change was voted in December, and then we opened up the applications because of the simplification process and because of the work people like staff like Jack Beard had done, the grants clinics, one-on-one clinics we ran, we ended up with 175 Thrive applications, right? The first year we did this work. So it spoke to the good work we had done in the grant simplification process, of which both of you were a part. But also it speaks to the fact that the community had started seeing a difference, that they were willing to trust Metro Arts again and take the time to apply. So I hope I'm not talking too much.
No, that's excellent. I just want to note that that was 175 that you brought in who were aware of Thrive and found it accessible enough to apply, whereas just the very year before it was only 22, from what I understand.
22, correct.
Yeah.
And the year before, Metro Arts gave money back in the budget.
Wow.
That is a sin to me. When there is money and there are artists who are starving, not able to pay their rent, not able to create their work, why is Metro Art returning money, which goes into the surplus, right? And so I was like, I am going to use up every single dollar that I can give to the artists or arts organizations. And that's why we wanted to make the application process accessible. And also, we wanted to ask the mayor's office with evidence that there is a need. If I just go with 22 applications and all 22 have been funded, that's not the evidence, right? So we have to show evidence of the artist need. And if you look at the Labor Bureau statistics, they are counting in Nashville and metropolitan area between like 15 to 30,000 individual artists. And they come at this number based on full-time equivalents at nonprofits that report them as having an arts-centered job, right? Like, so again, that's going to take out you and me, right? Because we don't have, I mean, like when I was working as a dancer, I was never a full-time dancer, right? Like I couldn't pay my bills with it. So I was never counted in that. And most artists are not counted in that. So I feel like that is also a lower count. But then off the 15,000, let's take the lower estimate of the Labor Bureau statistics, we were only funding like 22. So we have to build, so let's work with data, let's work with the pathways you're giving me. And so that was the beginning of the conversation. And that's how we came up with the ask for the 1% of the city budget in the arts advocacy conversations we had with the mayor's office and with the council, which still would be a severe underfunding. If you actually think about 15,000 individual artists in Nashville, right? Like those are the ones who have the full-time equivalent jobs. And then there are probably at least another 15,000 who don't have those jobs and who don't show up on any kind of statistical report.
Yeah, I think it's I've done like 2 presentations with a room of artists, and I've always asked how many of you have heard about Thrive last year, and the majority of the folks in the room will not, raise their hand. And I think about like how commissioners will say like, oh my God, 175 applications is so many applications.
Yeah.
But if you think about how many artists are in Music City, you were just beginning to scale up the government agency to actually meet the need of the community. And in a very sustainable way too, like just making sure it wasn't too much on staff and capacity and bringing it all that in. So it's just fascinating to me that you had the vision coming in to be very sustainable, very like managing it very well and having multiple wins and doing a lot of new things. So I didn't know that it was the first time that grants editing was done by the community, and then securing the 2 million and making sure all the funding was going out. Like all of these are major wins that were coming in 22 and 23.
Yeah. I mean, like some of those things, like I got played. I was new there. I didn't know all the Nashville politics, and the 2 million coming to us. As I mentioned when we did this last time, it was supposed to go to the Morris building, right, to purchase the historical African American building, the last building on a street that used to be a street full of African American owned arts, culture, and businesses, right? And Campbell West, the current chair at that point, asked me for language to justify why the money should not go to the Morris building and should be kept with Metro Arts, right? And so I gave her the language from Thrive Statistics because that was where the most diverse pool of artists were in the community, the biggest zip codes, biggest council districts. Like any way you slice it, Thrive was the one that was the most equitable pathway to funding, right? So I gave her all that language. They used that language to take money away from the Morris building. And then guess what? Then they funded it back to the arts monopolies, right? And then after the July meeting, July meeting, Campbell West left me this long voicemail saying, I just want to clear the air. I'm sorry I didn't vote for the first scenario, but I want to be on record with you just to say that I did vote for the sub buckets of the Thrive application. And I was like, it doesn't matter because at that point, the decision has been made, right? Like first they vote on the full scenarios we presented, how much is going to Thrive, how much is going to go to arts organizations. And then because of conflicts of interest, people have to break the Thrive into cohorts of just musicians or dancers or writers or theater makers so that people who have a conflict can recuse themselves from that pot. And so she voted against the Thrive funding overall, but then she said wanted to be tell me that she voted for each bucket after that. And I was like, at that point, the decision had been made. Your vote doesn't matter anymore, right? And so clearly there's something bothering her about her vote that she felt she had to call and leave this voicemail for me, which I still have saved, because who knows what other trick they might come up with in the future. And having evidence and records like this is important, like, as you know, the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, is available to all of this residents of Nashville, and it's an important tool for you all to use.
Yeah, and also, I mean, let's call out, because it's public record, the votes, the way they went. And at that July meeting, the vast majority were with you, were behind what you were doing. After everyone voted for the public grants edits that were instated, except for the one, then in July, everyone voted yes to fully fund Thrive, except Will Cheek, who was the one who didn't want the public grants edits going through. Then also he was joined by Janet Kurtz and Campbell West. Carol McCoy abstained, but everyone else was a yes. So yeah, it's easy to go along when the decision's already made and the monopolies aren't going to come down, and say, oh, you voted against us. Well,
yeah.
Yeah, I remember also on August 17th during the defunding vote, Jim Schmidt during the lunch break turned to me because I was sitting next to him, and he said, your organization is the type of organizations we should be funding. And I said, Jim, you have the opportunity now. You can make that right after lunch. You're gonna make that choice.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting to me the whatever is happening. Yeah, in their minds, that they feel the need to say, oh, you're doing great work, we're defunding you.
Exactly,
crazy.
right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, this is again something Justin always brought me back to. He said, are you making the lives of the artists materially different? Money or land? Like, what are you giving them? Those are the two things that can make the lives of art. So people will give you like a lot of magazine spreads, right? So the other commissioner you mentioned, lots of spreads of the artists who didn't get funded. And you know what? We need to take up every single space we can get in every media outlet. So yes, for that. But that is not money. It doesn't pay your bills, right? It doesn't let you work as an artist, right? So I think in their mind, they try to justify it by saying, I was kind to that person, or we'll give them publicity work, or we'll give them an introduction to X museum or X symphony or X organization. But what that does is then that institution commissions a work based on a certain theme, and then it's censoring the artist's resistance work, which if they had been funded individually, they would be able to do that work, right? Now they have to come in within a theme, and you know how tightly the theme is going to be curated and made sure that it doesn't push up against anything that the ruling class doesn't want to push up. And so, it's just diabolical.
It's interesting. Yeah. Who gets First Amendment rights is also a big topic, I feel, because we were not able to remove commissioners on the basis that their vote is their First Amendment right. So even if they're defunding and discriminating, they have a right to discriminate. So anyways, it's just fascinating that you also bring up the point about how the defunding also takes away First Amendment rights from artists, because it creates this power dynamic where artists have to create the art that art monopolies want to see. And I also want to add, going to your public comment where you mentioned like the soft power and the exertion of power. Now that we're at the August 17th defunding meeting, the visual during that meeting of like the artists who were standing in front of the commission for 2 hours making public comments, and then scurrying out to go to work. And then behind you in that video, you can see all the art monopoly executives in their suits, crossing their arms, very angry, rolling their eyes about the narrative that the community was bringing to the table. So, I just wanted to mention that from your public comment.
The way power has to work, right? It's not always overt. It can be just covert, but also, again, like going back to like what's happening in Gaza, right? Like they get to now decide who gets money and how much money they get, kind of how much food should be let in. They calculate how many calories a person needs in Gaza, and that's the number of calories there's allowing in, if XXXXXXXX conditions, right?
Yeah.
And randomly they can decide not to meet those conditions and stop food from going in. They can bomb hospitals, they can bomb mosques, they can, so it's always power is always wielded one directionally, right? And
Mm,
so in a
hmm
democracy, that's not supposed to happen, right? It's supposed to be
hmm
multiple people working together, voting, exercising transparency, and working through those processes. And not only is it about power working in a certain way, but everyone is thwarting is democracy, right? Like this is
hmm
democracy in a grassroots level, and they don't like it.
Right, right. And so post that August meeting, the MHRC complaint is filed. And this is
Did
when,
you want
like,
to talk about the arts advocacy meeting we had before that?
oh, yes, this was also yeah, very pivotal meeting, I think. And there is
Because
a
again, talking about powers,
yes, yes.
you can tell other people what you saw in that meeting.
Yeah, so that was between the July vote and the August vote. And at that point, Metro Legal had Will Cheek, the arts commissioner, had gone to Metro Legal, had said there has to be a way to recall this vote. Metro Legal's like, we got you. They send a 7 sentence memo. And then now we have the art monopolies who asked you for a private meeting, and you um on top of it said, let's do a public meeting, because I think a big part of fighting fascism is making it public, because they like to have closed door meetings. They like to say what they want to say. And I think that was very um pivotal for a lot of community folks who were in that room, because we are not in the board meetings. We are not behind those closed doors at the CEO's office. So we don't really know what they're saying. We can imagine. But it was at this meeting that we heard, budget size doesn't matter. If we're not funded, we're not going to advocate for the arts, like really like threatening language, which shows like, where their alliances really are, in my opinion. And there was a whole conversation about the Nashville Arts Coalition and why it was exclusively all white organizations, and why, I remember Shabazz Larkin,
Yes.
who was there, he was doing his best. He was like, I would like to advocate for the arts. Can I join? And the scurrying around his question. And it was just also like most of the people of color were on Zoom because we all had work, and then all the
Yeah.
executives were in the room. And it was nice for me to see them like scramble, because they had never had that kind of oh, we're advocating for the arts. I wasn't aware. Can I join as a black man? And them being like, well, we're still working on the website, like clearly not trying to include any of us, and trying to rework. Um, we asked where the agenda was, what's the point of this meeting? And they
Yeah.
were like, budget size doesn't matter, and the money should be going to us. So yeah, I was appreciative of that moment for artists to be in that room, to hear how the lack of care towards the community, and the greed. I felt that greed in the room, to feel like, if we don't get this money, you will not see us at the mayor's office.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
They
And
were
go ahead.
at the same time that they were arguing that they could be advocating for everyone, that they were organized and welcoming and
Right.
representing everyone, they were saying, oh no, we're too disorganized. Our membership's a mess. Our board's a mess. Our website isn't updated. And I had tried before to join their membership. There was no follow-up on that. Join the mailing
Mm.
list. There was nothing. After that meeting, there was a thread between the Nashville Arts Coalition, existing leadership and members, welcoming in Arts Equity Nashville. Specifically Cynthia Harris and I were in that thread where they were talking about reforming the board, making membership accessible, dropping that fee, which at my latest check, it's been dropped, but I tried to register again. It still didn't go through, or I didn't get any communications from them. So, it just completely trailed off. There was no follow through whatsoever.
Yeah,
Mm.
the Arts Coalition was formed to advocate for symphony, which was started by a wealthy white philanthropist who felt like Nashville needed culture. And by her definition of culture, it was ballet, opera, and symphony, right? forget that there was fiscal jubilee singers there for 150 years, way before any of those organizations were founded, but like again, importing Western colonial projects, and suddenly a wealthy philanthropist's hobbies becomes a taxpayer's burden, and the taxpayer, the artist, cannot be funded because it's going to go to an organization. So you see like this what started in the 70s, 60s with the National Endowment for the Arts, it's like you talked, it's a cycle, right? Like every few years there's another cycle and another city decides to have another organization. And so it always moves away from the artists and moves towards organizations. And so that was something that's stuck out for me about how there were only organizations represented in arts advocacy for Nashville. And also, the one of the commissioners who was the partner of one of the commissioners, arts commissioners at that point, was the one who won the arts advocacy contract for marketing and pushing arts advocacy, right? So talk about conflict of interest, right? Like, so they try to paint me as doing all these things that were against legal and finance and whatever. So there's a person who's sitting on the commission voting where the funding should go, and that person's partner wins the Arts Advocacy Coalition contract. And now, as we know, Symphony has been bankruptcy twice. And the person who was a finance director and who tripped us all up with his funding questions in cahoots with Will Cheek sat on the board of the Symphony, Kevin Crumbo, and he helped them refinance from bankruptcy. And his wife is on the board of Cheekwood. And but apparently there's no conflict of interest in him voting for an audit or stopping payment to Thrive. By what authority, I don't know, because council has approved it, commission has approved the funding. I don't know what authority he has at that point to like stop it, right? But enough apparently to stop it, right? So it's I just want to like call attention to how conflicts of interest are only brought up when it's going to be used as a way to stop us moving towards an anti-racist path.
Oh yeah. We've witnessed so many convenient applications of the law, interpretations that involve contortions just to benefit a choice party. Absolutely. And then, does that mean what it says? Yeah.
It's fascinating how little they may cite because they don't want to even let you find what they're citing. They're just like, it's the law. Don't worry about it. And the audit was very interesting. The audit started December 2023, and basically you came out squeaky clean from it because all of it was prior to it was just like Thrive is illegal. Like all this ridiculous nonsense.
But Thrive had been happening for many years under Jen Cole, who was the ED, but also her husband was on the council. So again, right, like, so if there's a white person running a program with a white husband on the commission, on the council, then maybe things won't be looked at so closely, right? So if it was a problem, the laws have not changed, and what we were doing with Thrive had not changed, right? So we were running it as a procurement process. Under 25,000, I have delegated authority in my office to do what I want to do. So I was able to put out a call. It was competitive. It was open. Multiple people applied. There was an individual rubric by which an independent panel that was not applying scored it. Then it went to the grants committee. Then it went CARE, went to the Arts Commission. There were like so many checks and balances there, right? Like there was nothing we were doing that was illegal. But the two previous EDs who were white women were doing it with no problem with procurement and finance and legal signing off on it, right? But again, when it's not convenient for them, they tripped us up with both the disparity study that we conducted, which we might want to talk about a little bit, but also not prevented us from using their disparity study, right? Like, so, yeah.
We definitely Yeah, we need to get into that. I also just want to
Right.
name on the audit, one of the other concerns, because you were talking about when it's a white director, not an issue. And then you came and actually moved the needle on the funding to benefit the community. And all of a sudden it's an issue when it hadn't been for 10 years. Well, the other thing is one of the issues where people say, oh, there's something going on with the audit, they talk about the contractors. And that's the thing, there was a hiring freeze from what I understand, yet we still want the work to get done. And you hire qualified contractors who are making demonstrable results. And what happens?
Well, so it's not quite a hiring freeze. It was, we were caught between fiscal years, right? So I started and we were doing all this grants work. So we couldn't focus on hiring because we're trying to get the editing done. The new grant cycle's open. And we were also short-staffed between doing the grants clinics, trying to get the stuff up on the website. And so I had to dust off my computer science brain and learn how to code HTML and start working on this stuff because everyone was doing everything, right?
Wow.
I was working on the web page and trying to get the submittable application flow to work. And so we got all of that done. And then we were kind of in March. And so the people were the HR and finance was saying, well, our budget's going to go to the mayor now in March or April, and then council vote on it in May. So you want to wait till the new fiscal year. So if there's any salary changes, you want to use the new salary band. And if not, then you'll be fine. But if you don't want to bring someone in March and then say, oh, you came in to before this salary band changed, and then you are kept from receiving that promotion, not promotion, but the raise, right? And the council gave a 7% COLA and a 5% merit increase. So that was a 12% raise they gave that year. So it makes sense why they asked us to wait, right? And so because they hadn't received a raise in 5 or 6 years since the pandemic. So
I'm just comparing it to this past year where they got only 4%. So just fascinating the big win that came pre-O'Connell. But anyways, yes.
Yes. And so there's the other thing, right? So at least with the pre-O'Connell administration, you knew where you stood, right? But with the current administration, there's all these virtue signaling of what they want to do, what they mean, but they're actually worse in some situations than what happens under the previous administration. And same thing, right? With what happened with the genocide in Gaza, people were talking about, Palestinians have a right to have a sovereign nation, but we'll also send more bombs than either one of the world wars have seen at the same time, right? So which one would you rather prefer? At least now we know where we stand with the current White House administration, and we can plan around it, versus someone who's on paper saying they're going to do X, Y, and Z and is sending bombs, building this ocean pier that cost hundreds of millions of dollars and got washed away, right? Instead of actually just opening the gates and letting food go into the people who are starving, right? It's like a metaphor for what's happening in Nashville. Now you have to do the fiscal agency, You can only be funded for these 6 months. And there was no democratic process. You didn't have a grant panel that evaluated these scorings. They did, I don't know what magic by which they arrived at this formula. And now you have an acting white ED and a white chair, and everything is just hunky-dory. But I did everything transparently, but there was all these problems with what I did, right? And I know MHRC and Ashley have been great allies of the work we've done, but there's a difference in how they're being treated and how I was treated and the work the artists were doing was treated. And I have to ask, what's the difference,
Yeah. I mean, specifically, you're talking about, again, I'm going to bring it back to the contractors, the difference of treatment. You are spreading funding around with qualified artists in the community doing the work. And when does the issue come up? It comes up when the work they're doing is the anti-racist work, or
absolutely,
when
yes.
Yeah.
And it was with Justin and Dana, so they were frustrated because they were the two who were the most anti-racist thinkers in our group, right? Because I told you, only 3 of the 15 commissioners came to the CARE and commission meeting. So the commission doesn't have the training. Staff hadn't had the training. And yes, lived experience is valid, but you also have to be able to translate that into a framework and into an applicable model. And so I think that's what the clarity that came with Justin and Dana, right? Like they were like, okay, are you going to stay in reform? That's fine, but stay in reform. Know you're working in reform, or are you going to be in the radical space? And Justin was always pushing us to be in the radical space and think differently, and that's what we should be doing, right? Like because we've given 400 years to capitalism and it hasn't worked.
Mm,
And
mm,
similarly, there are organizations that have gone bankrupt. The arts monopolies have gone bankrupt twice, but that's not a financial concern. An artist potentially going to Publix or Kroger's and buying food might be a problem. But the fact that a major organization had to declare bankruptcy twice is not a problem, right? Like, so
mm, mm.
on
Yeah,
public record,
yeah.
there are commissioners saying that artists, what if an artist just goes and buys something at Kroger's? Well, what
Oh
if an
no.
organization goes and does that at Kroger's? How would we know? We wouldn't know. Like, what's the difference between an organization and an artist doing it? And if an
Mm.
artist needs to eat, what's wrong with that? Right? Like,
Right. Or to serve perhaps some meals to the artists who are working on a project, similar as an employee of an arts institution might buy groceries, might
like
need
the gala
lunch.
that's underwritten by core civics at many of the major organizations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Many of the arts
Mm-hmm.
monopolies have galas that's underwritten by core civics, the first private prison organization in the country, founded in Tennessee.
Yeah. Connected to Bill Lee at the state. So
Yes.
yeah, but they like to say they're big D Democrat, but you know, this is I do think it is fascinating that there's constantly this dichotomy in Nashville between, oh, the Nashville government's an all boys club, and then um, and therefore if things are going to happen, they have to happen like outside that old boys club, and that's why we need new people to come in, which I think really was the push to bring you to Nashville.
Yeah.
Um, and then at the same time, we were hearing a lot, especially in like February of 2024. Yeah, 1 year ago, a lot of this like, oh, well, you need to work well with other departments, in order to lead this, in order to lead Metro Arts as well. Which I think is like I think you manage working with other departments as well as you could to be anti-racist, with anti-racism being the priority. Um, and then it's just, you know, I was listening to the Arts Commission meeting yesterday, and it's so hard to watch because it's like these people, they just cannot, they don't want to make a choice, right? When you had clearly come out of the gate and said, we're making a choice, and the choice is anti-racism, and you back that up with disparity studies, which I think we want to talk about now. So I just want the theme of this to be choice.
Choice, yes.
Yes, and that, I think there's an idea that even if you're prioritizing anti-racism, you're gonna not work with departments. But I think you showed that you got legal to approve, you got finance to approve, you were working with HR, you had a team, you were short-staffed, but you still pulled it through. The audit didn't get anything. The HR report didn't get anything. Embarrassing when Luther and a full attorney stood up there and was like, well, it's just a disagreement between a director and a staff member who's been here a few weeks. um, and yeah, anyways, so all of
Yeah.
this was a choice even by the commission to not bring you back, and continually feel like, oh, we didn't have a choice. No, there were multiple avenues of choice, and we see people of color making the choices for community members and other
Most of the
allies.
times.
Yeah,
Most
most
of
of the
the
time.
not
Allies and
always.
artists.
Yes, yes, yes.
True, 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 true.
Yeah. So
Yes.
yeah, the disparity study, was
Yes.
done right before the July vote, right? And we were told we had to do our own disparity study. We couldn't use procurement's disparity study. So I was like, okay, we'll do our own study. And in the meantime, while our own study is going, I reached out to Michelle Lane and I said, can we use your study? And she said, of course you can use our study. Why did you think you can't? And we said, we were told by legal that it's only for construction. And she said,
Mm,
no, the process is different. You can't use it for grants. The disparity study was done for procurement. So you can run your grants as procurement. It's a different flow. but the funding gets to the same people. You have to run it as procurements, and then you have to follow all of the metrics we set up in the procurement office to meet the disparity study requirements for procurement, but then you can do it. So that's what she said. So we said, okay, well, we'll do our own. If it doesn't work, we'll go to hers. So we did our own with Rise Research. And to be able to do a disparity study, you have to have enough of a sample size, right, of general organizations. And within the general organizations, we wanted to see if there was a disparity between BIPOC arts organizations and white-led, white-serving organizations, right? And the disparity was so huge that it failed the power test, right? They didn't have enough BIPOC arts organizations funded in the 35 years that we've been funding for them to be able to run the test. Like you need a basic amount for them to actually be able to like run the statistical analysis. And so that's how bad the disparity was. And of course it didn't have a legal review, and so legal said, oh no, you can't use this disparity study because it didn't have a legal review. But Rice Research asked the same firm that had done the procurement disparity study. They gave us an hour. They told us the methodology of how they did it for the procurement study. They gave us the path for us to do it for arts organizations. We follow the exact same steps. And so we did the exact same methodology that was done for procurement. But even though it was done the same methodology, we were told it's not legally reviewed.
Of course.
Not okay, right? So, but then like, of course, then they pay the same firm, Griffin and Strong, or I forget the name of the Strong. Let me not make up names. Some other. So the same firm that paid, who did the disparity study for procurement, who advised us on the methodology to do our disparity study, writes a letter saying the methodology is not valid. You have to do a study through us. So clearly, if you have a contract with $150,000 to do it, then they'll tell you whatever you want them to say, right? Like so this firm advised us on the methodology, and we did it the way they wanted to do it. Then Wally Dietz calls them up and says, I disagree. Then they give him a different letter for which I have to pay them another $150,000 to do another disparity study to see if we have a disparity. And I'm sure I can guess where under Dietz and Crumbo where that disparity study might have gone, right? Like so
it's also
choices.
crazy. Yeah, one of the thing about white supremacy is like it's right in front of you. We can all see the disparity. But they want you
I had to prove
gaslight
it.
you.
And this is what I was like. I was in like such the reform lane. I was like the most boring bureaucrat you can think I was, right? I was doing everything they asked me to do. But even within the reform lane, I was starting to bump up against the ceiling of what they could do, right? Like because the co-optation of artists and all of this stuff eventually hits the ceiling. And then you're like, okay, there's the ceiling of what you can do in capitalism. It's everything that you told me is showing up here, right? And then they clamp down.
I'll also say in terms of the audit saying like it was illegal to to have Thrive and blah blah blah. The Tennessee Arts Commission, which many of the arts commissioners are very attached to at the state level, funds individuals directly. But they somehow wanted to perpetuate on the commission the same thing finance wanted to perpetuate. And then we had to dig that up and be like, oh, remember this? Remember there's a fellowship to directly fund artists. And so it's just constant. It's just amazing to me how they can make the people who are pro equity seem like we're crazy. We don't follow the law. We're like these.
I think that's the liberal
outlaws.
fallback, right? Like because liberals want to say all the right things, but they want you to reform and be co-opted, right? Like look at all the programs the Black Panther started, right? Breakfast program, co-opted by white organizations in schools or communities. All of those things that the Black Panther Party was doing gets co-opted. And so similarly here also, I feel like the work we are trying gets co-opted by the larger organizations, right? Like because now suddenly there are all these calls by the arts monopolies for individual artists. And so then the artists can't quite they have to pay their bills. And absolutely, if I were in their shoes, I would take the jobs I get. But then they can't come out and do a public comment. And so it starts getting co-opted, right? Like in Splinter, divide and rule, all of these very, very traditional colonization approaches. It's tried and true. And the liberal, there's a 2-page document by Mao on liberalism and why liberals cannot engage with discomfort, right? And I think that's the issue, right? Like anti-racist work is going to make you uncomfortable, and you have to sit with that discomfort rather than trying to like rush and change things. And you both pointed out to me the first round of Grant's editing when I was talking, without knowing what I was saying about trying to be conscious of the harm that the changes might perpetuate. And you both pointed out that what about the harm to the communities of color that haven't been funded at all? Like, which harm do you want to like protect more? The organizations that have huge budgets or the artists who are not funded? And so that's kind of how the discomfort that liberals feel where they can't sit with discomfort when you're doing anti-racist work showed up with Ellen Angelico, right? Like I got my evaluation in July of 23, ranked excellent in every single category by all the commissioners. And then we were off in August and we had one meeting in September. And then suddenly she couldn't deal with the discomfort, right? Of sitting and saying to legal, no, this is what we want to do with the commission, or this is what we want to do with our hiring with HR. And suddenly, after having received a glowing evaluation in July, the vote in July happens, and then the defunding happens, no meeting after that. One meeting after that in November, already there's like a problem with how I work with other departments. After having no problems with Mattia for like a whole year, suddenly in 2 meetings, there's a problem with how I work with other departments. And this is the problem with liberalism, right? Like, because you think you can reform your way into making a Frankenstein of a product in capitalism, but you can't do that. You're going to have to either come over to the anti-racist side or live with your Frankenstein. It's not going to look pretty, And when that meeting happened, clearly there had been conversations with the commissioners, even though they're not supposed to talk outside of the commission meetings, because multiple commissioners had called staff and they had called Dana digging for information about me. And so then they come to the commission meeting in November and like saying, there's this happening, that happening, staff are saying this. I'm like, this is the first time I'm hearing it. I'm happy to respond to any of them. But so this is where like, someone who says they're for equity falls back on liberalism. And this was my problem too, right? Like, because often I would say a rising tide lifts all ships. Some of us are not in that, don't even have a boat, don't even have a life jacket, we're drowning, right? Like, so I would fall back on these liberal metaphors like that, right? And sometimes you have to say, I'm going to save the person with no boat and no life jacket, and that means the person with the hole in the boat is going to have to plug the hole with their fingers and wait till I can come back and get them, and they might never get anything because I need to get someone who's drowning out of the water, right? And so that's what happened. And as I mentioned, Laura Cox, I don't know what her last name is, comes to that meeting and clearly says that I have never attended department head meetings. She's not a department head. She's never attended a single department head meetings. She would not know to say that unless Ellen had called her and asked her what's going on or said she's having issues with me. And then someone else fed Laura what she needs to say. And Laura was also the one who did not want to settle with Janine. When Janine filed a grievance, and when I first started,
she was the grants manager at Metro Arts.
And she was also trying to do equity work, and they found a way to get rid of her. And when I looked at all the work and the evidence, and I said we should settle. I mean, regardless of, we're not going to say who's right or wrong. The amount of time it's going to take all of us to work through this is not worth it. Let's just settle. And Laura wouldn't settle. Davy Tucker was in the room with us for that discussion, right? And then 5 months later, they decided they're going to settle after all because they realized how much work it would take to defend it, right? And so there's this pattern of liberals, all of them identify as liberals, right? And Tessa, for that matter, saying something to us when we were doing the grant editing process, working through the process, but
Mm,
then not feeling comfortable enough to stand up against her bosses, who also
mm,
identify as liberals,
mm,
right? Like, so when they question our decision based on the affirmative action ruling, she's a practicing attorney. She could have given her opinion, the same opinion she gave us in the commission meeting, she could have given to her bosses, but they don't. Liberals don't stand with discomfort. They just fold,
mm,
right? And
mm,
that's something that really Justin pushed me to build that tension in my head and be willing to sustain it and say, are you going to be anti-racist? Can you withstand the tension it takes to be in this space?
mm,
And for how long? And you know, and sometimes someone else makes the decision of not letting me be there. I was willing to be there and do the work and sustain the tension because we're
mm,
not going to get to any solutions by just collapsing each time there's a um,
mm.
something uncomfortable, right?
Yeah. I will say before I think we need to wrap up, but
Wrap
let
up,
me say
yeah.
something actually funny to you. But at the commission meeting yesterday, there was a conversation. So one of the new commissioners was like, if I wanted to have community engagement questions presented at the community engagement sessions, do I send that to you, Ashley, Batchelder, the interim executive director, and she was like, yes. And Vivian Fox cuts in, who's the office assistant at Metro Arts, to say, you can email them to me and Chuck Beard, who's the community engagement
Engagement manager.
manager. Yes. And so then Commissioner Sean Knight then so he's like, okay, and he's like writing that down. And then Ashley cuts in and is like, no, 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 there's not gonna be any more communication. She doesn't say it like this, but basically is like, we kind of want to stop the communication between commissioners and staff.
Interesting,
That
right?
goes straight to me. So,
A white person gets to say that, but I don't get to say that.
yeah, which is like how and there were multiple points at that meeting yesterday where they were like, it's inappropriate because Jester wanted to do staff work and do the technical review for the applications for Thrive that have been delayed 12 months. And Tessa cut in and was like, that is, again, we've had a very inappropriate amount of commissioners and staff not knowing whose role or what's going on. No. And they had to just tell him, no, you are a commissioner. Let the staff do their job and stay out of staff.
But it was ironic that Carol McCoy
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
and all of them could question staff or have meetings with staff, the current grants manager, directly without me present. And Will Cheek and Ellen Angelico started this, and all of them identify as liberals, right? Bleeding liberals.
Mm-hmm.
But they cannot withstand the pressure it takes to work through something that legal says is not okay, or
Mm-hmm.
something procurement says or HR says is not okay. And that's going to be the question, is like with arts equity or the artists, can you stay in this place of tension because the artists are pushing up against you and the commissioners are pushing back against you? And these are
Mm.
in the slides that Justin has shared with our staff retreat, right? This is the pressure, right? There's downward pressure from the ruling class, and then the artists are rising up, and arts equity
Mm-hmm.
or me
Mm-hmm.
or whoever is in that role is in this middle place. Who are you going to pick, right? Are you going to please the ruling class? Are you going to please the artists?
Mm.
Like, where do you have to live in that place of tension? It's interesting for me to hear that Ashley Batchelder is getting this much support, and she can say that. And I had staff sitting on the same round circle as the commissioners because I did not want staff to be in the back without having a chance to speak at the meetings, right? Like that
Mm.
was till then, it was only the executive director who sat at the table. Everyone else sat in the back. And I was like, no, we have a circle, we have one circle. It's not like concentric rings of circle, which is again power, right? Like that's how power is represented physically. And I said, no, we're going to do this all together. But then, like then that can be used to undermine you when you want to be collaborative, when you want to bring everyone into the circle. Someone can stab you
Mm.
in the back too, right? So that's the
Mm.
challenge.
Ooh. I think our final question is going to be, if you're a commissioner now wearing the commissioner hat, what would be the policy change you would want to push through?
So, I would bring Justin Lang back to work through that. It
Mm,
has to be a community driven policy change,
Mm,
right? It cannot be something
mm,
the commission wants or the staff wants or the ED wants, whoever. It has to be
mm,
something the community wants. And Justin is excellent at both training the community on what is the anti-racist pathway, but he's also really good at checking you. Hey, you're taking the liberal shortcut. That doesn't really
mhm,
achieve the anti-racist objective you say you're trying to do, right? Like material difference. And
mhm,
with his coaching, staff arrived at these four or three things, right? Like reframing the language and then um, redistribute power and resources. And the third thing was like, how do we make everything democratic, right? Like,
mm,
and that's still valid. Those three things are still valid. How do we reframe the language? How do we redistribute resources and power? And how do we democratize everything we're doing? I don't want to hear of another grant panel that the community didn't have a community panel and voted on each application, because that's what the independent panel's work is, right? Like otherwise, one person's interest or recommendations is being now presented as policy. That's not a good way to build policy, right? Without community
mm,
input.
mm,
So I would bring him back, and that might not be the three priorities for the community when he comes back. They might have other priorities. But the last time we worked through with him in the grants editing process and with the staff training, that was what surfaced as our need. But I think bringing him back and having a conversation with the artists and arts equity and the commissioners and staff and seeing where things
mm,
go would be what I would do if I were a commissioner and had that power.
mm.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Daniel. It's always
Of
good to talk to
course.
you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good luck with the work you're doing. Really grateful for you to
Yeah,
be there fighting for the artists.
yeah,
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Daniel, for speaking to the
Of
great
course.
need and all the work that you have been doing all along to fill that need, and also to be an artist who has needs
yeah.
yourself. We appreciate
Yes.
you and
Thank
recognize you.
you. Thank you. I
Mm,
appreciate it.
And
Appreciate
I
it.
want to, yeah, I also want to say thank you to the listeners and artists tuning in. We are here to be alongside you in calling for equitable arts funding and distribution of our own tax dollars to, for instance, the Thrive base, which is the one that most closely represents the demographics
mm,
here in Nashville. And here at Arts Equity Nashville, we've gotten funding to do this program, public comments, in addition to a working artist survey. And that funding is coming from Columbia University's Incite Institute Assembling Voices Fellowship. So for any artists who are living and working here in the Nashville area, or if you just visit and come and work here sometimes, or if you live here and have to go elsewhere to work, we're trying now to collectively look at all of the different conditions that artists face here in Nashville. We have a survey. It's linked on our website, artsequitynashville.org. Please go there and take the survey, share it. We want to hear from everyone, the people who have not been captured in those demographics before, the ones that are somehow being missed. We want to call everyone in and share the information so we can engage in collective bargaining, so we can make informed decisions, so we can ask
mm,
for more together and lifting our voices together. We'll be
mm.
back on February 15th. We'll be looking at privatization with Nicole Brent Minyard of Daybreak Arts, which is excellent. Yeah, thank you, Lydia.
Great.
Thank you,
Thank
Daniel.
you,
See
Christy.
you later. Bye.
Yeah, bye.
Happy Valentine's Day.